The views and opinions expressed on this show are those of its host and owners and in no way represent the views of the people, institutions, or organizations that Scenic City Sports is involved with in a professional or personal capacity. Thanks for watching and enjoy the show.
Welcome to Scenic City Sports tonight on a Wednesday, the 22nd of June, 2020.
We really like the idea that we're keeping you guessing on what night we actually are going to come on. So we before we set one in stone, we've got to check out every night of the week just to see which one feels the most comfortable.
Coming a little bit later than normal tonight. We had some traffic issues and dinner issues and
We have lives, folks.
yeah. Sorry,
we have lives.
Speaking of those two, you did not hear me speak up in that return, but those two have lives.
I feel like Peaches and Herb tonight.
Peaches and Herb.
And you say that because?
Reunited, and it feels so good.
Okay.
After 8 weeks, guess what's sitting right outside those doors?
You finally found
My car is back.
an engine and a headlight and whatever else it was missing.
It has been on the disabled list for 8 weeks.
Uh-huh.
But it is finally back, and I could not be more thrilled.
I know one that's been out there longer than yours for a headlight, and it's been since March, and it's still sitting in the shop.
Well, mine needed a new engine, and it's a hybrid. And then it also needed a new water pump, because you can't put an old water pump with a brand new engine.
You got another 200,000 miles in that car coming.
God, I hope.
New engine. What else can go out?
I hope, because literally, the used car market, I kid you not, that same car that I drive, which is a 2012 Kia Optima, we found one with 50,000 miles that they wanted 18,000 for.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, I almost paid that much for it new.
Yeah,
and
which
so
makes
now we
makes
just
it
put
sound
a new engine in it. And
well. That makes
I
it
got
sound
it.
very sour when you hear those numbers and you say, "I did that
You gotta be
new.
kidding.
Why would I do that?"
And I looked at the used cars that were available for what I was going to pay for the engine, and I'm like, no.
Well, it sounds like you
There's
made
no
it.
way.
You made a business decision with something you were still in love with. So
Yes.
there you are.
I do love that car. I have missed it, and I'm glad it's back. But got a few things to talk about. We will reveal the top 10. I told you I'd get it done.
You said it. You told me when I first presented it to you. You said I've already done that in college.
Well, I didn't know what you were.
So
I didn't
we
know you
went
were gonna
from
throw me the
it was
curveball.
already in the notes since college to a month
You
later.
threw
we're
the
presenting.
curveball at me because I had top 10 game shows, top 10 game show hosts. No, it's got to be a duo. That changes.
Well, that only makes sense that the host that goes along with the actual show itself. I mean, because some of these shows, and they're all iconic, have had different hosts that's brought different things to that show, and some of them are not argumentative, and some of them are.
Yeah.
And we're going to bring some of the argumentative ones to your attention.
Yes.
Since you did this all on your own.
Yes, I've been looking.
You're the sole
I have been
author.
looking forward to this debate coming up, but I wanted to talk a little bit first about the only we were talking just before the show. The only way I could describe this now, the Live Golf Tour has become the NWO of professional golf. You don't know who's going to turn heel. You don't know who's going to show up wearing the black and white.
Is Hogan going to come out there with that guitar music?
I don't know. I don't know what's going on. But Brooks Koepka has left now.
Kepka's gone.
After saying, in February.
Never ever.
Well, I'm sure somebody will sell out and go. Well, guess who sold out and went? It was him. But his brother's on that tour, too. So I thought that was a weird statement to begin with. And there's rumors that others are maybe jumping ship. And now the PGA Tour has responded by saying, it was kind of funny. We're all about tradition and history and competition. We're not all about the money. Well, guess what? They just introduced about 8 more events with $20,000 purses, and they've upped the purses for some of their big tournaments and stuff.
If money's what it's going to take to get you boys here, then maybe we'll just look at that money thing again, just in case. I mean,
The PGA Tour Commissioner, Jay Monahan, had a press conference today, and he basically said, our hand kind of got forced, and so this is how we're responding. So, it's interesting. It's interesting to say the least.
Well, and we all somewhat speculated, but at the same time have a very good idea where the money's coming from the live side of it.
Right.
And they didn't start out with no little bitty chump change. They enticed these guys with large dollars, and so you would think the PGA was sitting back and saying, well, hopefully that won't mean that much. Well, really, I mean, it does mean a lot too.
well, you're talking to get the kind of money that these guys are getting. I mean, you pretty much got to win a FedEx Cup.
Yeah.
For a year.
Yeah.
I mean, what the FedEx Cup pays an average of about 15 million, give
Something
or
like
take.
that, yeah.
If you take the FedEx Cup for the whole season, well, I mean, if I'm Mickelson and I'm getting $1.8, $2 million or whatever per tournament to show up. I play 10 tournaments. It don't matter what I win. I've made $20 million just by showing up and smiling.
And I've openly admitted that I got a gambling problem that's made me lose a bunch of money.
I got to pay those gambling debts at some point, but I mean, you know, and like Scott said, the NWO one, that angle's hilarious to me. And I'm telling you, he announced his retirement from CBS. Sir Nick Faldo, don't be surprised. Nick Faldo came up in an era when they didn't make the kind of money that the guys make today.
That's true.
And granted, I'm sure he's making some pretty good money from CBS. But it'd be pretty tough if Live Tour calls up and says, "Hey, man, what are you making? $8 million a year? How about I give you 16?" I mean,
and you have to work less days.
Yeah, and we'll let you do half the tournament you were going to do.
And let me say that too, argumentative that the type of money that he's been making with CBS was probably more than he was making on the tour back in the day.
Absolutely.
So it is good dollars.
Absolutely.
It is good dollars.
I think we talked about the other day, Tiger, in his entire PGA Tour career, just in tournament earnings, not sponsorships and everything, just in tournament, what he played and made playing golf, he's made $121 million.
121 that way, but he is a billionaire, so we know the rest of it's come somewhere else.
But Dustin Johnson made 150 reportedly just for signing his name. Kepka's making $100 million supposedly just for signing his name. So
now, Scott, you may not know the ins and outs of that, but is that money that's there for the lifetime of you being a part of us, or is that $100 million over what?
Well, that $100 million is I'm
$100 million to
that's
get
a
you there?
signing bonus. Here's $100 million to come, and I think that appearance fee is going to be paid to you as long as it is still profitable for that appearance fee to be paid to you. You know, as long as you're still a name and as long as you're still a draw, as long as there are people still coming to watch you, and you know that person is bringing names in, that's always going to be there. But you know, don't let anybody like Mickelson or any of those. If Mickelson all of a sudden goes into a god-awful slump, doesn't win, doesn't do crap for 3 or 4 years, that appearance fee is going to either go down or it's going to dry up completely because you're not getting any benefit off him. The benefit of having him is if he comes out there, and number one, if he comes out there, but number two, if he comes out there and plays well, that's a benefit. I'm not going to pay, you know, that's like being, you know, the Boston Celtics and calling up Kevin McHale and DJ and Parrish and saying, "Hey man, we'll give you $7,000 every home game that you just come and sit 3 rows behind the bench."
But let's be argumentative here on this. I mean, Mickelson's best days are not in front of him; they're behind him.
I know. Big word.
I mean, they're behind him. Yes. I mean, so he's not going to be the player that he once was.
But he's also not playing against a field the size that he would be playing against on the PGA Tour.
Right.
He's playing against a field of 20-some-odd guys.
But he just shot, 14 over in 2 rounds here recently.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not discounting that. I'm just saying he's got a better chance of winning on the Live Tour than he does of winning on the PGA Tour. On the Live Tour, if you can get past Koepka, you can get past, you know, DeChambeau, some of those guys, and those guys are going to have bad days. If you can get past those guys, there's more of a chance for you to win money. Well, whereas on the PGA Tour, everybody's so damn hungry and wanting the money and going out there with everything they got. That's why on the PGA Tour, you know, a lot of times, and this is what I think has always irritated them sometimes, is that you get a lot of times when you watch a Saturday and a Sunday, you know, if you work during the week and the only 2 rounds that you really get to watch is a Saturday and a Sunday round, you come home on Saturday, you kick back, you turn the golf on, and you're like, who the hell's that guy? Where did he come from? And then you got like Jim Nantz going, "Oh, this is Joe Bob Smo. He's number 984 on the money list. He's from Jolly Fat Sweet Hawkins State.
7th alternate.
Yeah. I mean,
Pigs Knuckle, Arkansas.
But he got a chance to win his first tournament, and it just happens to be the U.S. Open.
Yeah, you see stuff. Well, that's another thing like the U.S. Open. The U.S. Open has always irritated me. Of all the majors, you know, you watch the Masters, and you can pretty much have an idea of who's going to be in contention.
Yeah.
You watch the British Open, and you got a pretty good idea of who's going to be in contention. But you watch the U.S. Open, and just like Roy McIlroy says in Tin Cup, it's the most democratic tournament in all the world. It's open. They don't care if you're a garbage man or a driving range pro from Salome, Texas. Anybody can win it.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you turn on that U.S. Open, and by the second round, you're like, God, where'd all the good guys go?
And I'll be honest, the guy that won it, I've never heard of.
No, I hadn't heard of him either.
Well, and in tradition, speaking of the U.S. Open, you got to stay out of the roughs. That's typically, so no matter if you hit it the furthest and you're over there 5 yards off the fairways, you got a troublesome day in front of you.
Boys, I'll say it the same way I say it every time.
The fairways.
280 wins the Open.
Yeah.
280 wins the Open. That's what they want. 4 rounds of 70. That's 280. It's going to win the Open every time.
And I thought that course was set up about as fair as any U.S. Open course I've ever seen.
Telling you right now.
You play well, you can score. But if you're off just a hair, you're in trouble.
I'll tell you right now, you could come to me every year before the U.S. Open started and said, here's what I'll do. I'll give you 280 right now. You can sit in the clubhouse and drink beer for 4 straight days. I'll give you 280 posted right now. Will you take it? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Because I promise you, if I post 280 on day 4, I'm going to be in the top 5. So I'll gladly sit in that clubhouse and drink beer for 280.
I can't
Absolutely.
think, the only U.S. Open winner that comes off the top of my head that beat 280 was Tiger at Pebble in 2000. Mm-hmm. I don't think anybody else has done it since. We can
there's
look
been
it up, but
it stays right around there. For folks, those of you that don't, we're talking golf terms right now. For those of you who don't know what we're talking about, par in a U.S. Open is 70. That's the way the USGA sets it up. It's the way they've always set it up. What they will usually do is they'll take a shorter par 5 or 2 shorter par 5s on the golf course they're playing. They'll shorten that back to, or they'll lengthen 2 par 4s basically out of that, and they'll cut par back to 70. When we say 280, we mean basically that you shoot even par for 4 straight rounds, because that's the way they set those golf courses up. U.S. Open setup is nothing like anything that you will ever see at any other golf course. The first cut of rough is 3.5 inches deep, and the second cut is almost knee deep. It's just what they do. So that's what we're saying when we say I'd take 280 all day long. That's 4 rounds of even par. You dang Skippy, I'll take it at the U.S. Open every day.
And make a whole lot of money.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe win a tournament or two.
Well, we teased it a little bit already. Let's get into this. Game show list. So let me start by saying this. I have the list. I know what the list is. I will announce it to these guys one at a time, and they can talk about it. But I want to throw a couple of honorable mentions out there. Scott can throw one out there, and I'll throw one out there. Rob doesn't have
honorable others receiving votes.
Yeah, others receiving votes. Rob doesn't have the list here in front of him. So,
no, I do not have the list in front of me.
I mean,
keep in mind the criteria here, as was presented to me, it has to be a game show along with a host.
Yeah.
As a combination.
The host.
Yes.
The host that made that game
as
show.
a combination.
And I would, Rob and I talked about one before Scott got here earlier, and that is the Gong Show. Not a.
I would have voted for it.
It's a. I don't even know that I would necessarily call it more than just an entertainment show, because the Gong Show really was more about
we
people
did give
coming
away
out
$250 at the end.
Yeah, showing funny talents and things like that. But it was just a fun show. Everybody always
had a
enjoyed
cult following.
watching it. Had a cult following,
which puts us in the cult.
Love Connection. There's you. I mean, that's a good one.
Which I said the Love Connection is basically the
because you did get
technology version of the dating game.
But give me, you talking game shows though. I'll go way out of the box on these. Give me a couple of kids game shows that we all grew up watching. Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? Double Dare. Mm-hmm. Some of those shows that used to play on Nickelodeon in the afternoon, I promise you there's a whole generation of kids that watched those shows and thought, man, one of these days.
Well, let's start at 10.
They were considered.
So we'll
start at 10. And
I actually had to leave 2 of my favorite game shows off the list.
Well, after we name 10, you can Nate,
so we
tell
got
us
10A and 10B. So
10A, 10B.
I just could now. Let me just, for the record, just state I took a bunch of stuff into consideration for this: the longevity of the show, the popularity of the show, the charisma of the host, the name of the host, how long they were there, and the game show's place in pop culture history.
Okay. Those are fair parameters.
So there was a lot of stuff that was considered going into this, and I'll be honest, the top 4 were easy. The next 5, 6, 7. I shuffled around about a dozen times before I came up with it.
So our first number 10, I'm going to bring it up on screen, is the Pyramid with Dick Clark. Mm-hmm. You could have called it the $10,000 pyramid, the $25,000 pyramid. I think there was even a $50,000. It might have even been a $100,000 pyramid.
And let me say something about that show. It did have longevity. It's still out there at times. It's even got a nighttime version of it. I was not a huge fan of this show. It didn't make me sit and watch this show. However, I think in this particular case, Dick Clark is this show.
Yes.
And he's what made that show better.
Dick Clark is the show.
Donny Osmond did a good job in later years.
See, I would have missed that quiz. I don't even know who we're talking about.
I mean, as far as a game show
goes, there's a really good Friends episode where Joey has to go on the $10,000 pyramid with Donny Osmond.
Yeah.
That is a classic.
I mean, as far as game shows go, it wasn't the greatest game show. It wasn't bad by any stretch of it was good. It wasn't great.
Mm-hmm.
And the celebrity that they had on it were pretty good. But Dick Clark was an icon. Yeah, that was Mr. American Bandstand.
You got good celebrities on Pyramid, though.
Yeah, you got
most
some.
of the time. You weren't watching every week and seeing Kathy Griffin and Andy Dick. I mean, you got A-list celebrities a lot of times did the Pyramid.
You got a lot of Soupy Sales.
Okay.
You got a lot of Marsha.
You're making a point there.
Oh, I forgot her name. She was on Newhart.
Yeah. Well, and you also had, Scott Baio was on there a bunch of times back at a time when Charles in Charge was huge.
I remember Marky Post being on it from Night Court.
I think Ricky Schroeder was on there.
We would all agree that the host in this particular case
absolutely.
is what's got that show in the top 10.
This is one where the charisma of the host far outweighed the show itself.
And he was there, I think, 15 years on that show. So.
Among doing 400 other jobs at the same time.
Yeah.
10A.
Rocking New Year's Eve.
10A is one that holds a special place in my heart. And when I looked this show up, I looked for a specific photo because you can't do this show justice without this particular photo. The people at home are already seeing it right now. You guys will see it flash up on the screen here in just a second. But number 10A was Password with Alan Ludden. Now, when this pops up here in just a second, that's the picture that I'm talking about.
Yep.
Betty White made a bazillion appearances on Password. Why did Betty White make a bazillion appearances on Password?
Rob?
Because Dick Clark owned that show too.
No. Betty White was Alan Ludden's wife.
Yes, that way. Yeah,
that's where they met. They met on Password.
That's right.
She fell in love with him. He fell in love with her. And anytime they needed somebody, Betty was always available. Yeah. I've watched a documentary about her not long ago, and there were times when somebody else would cancel, and Betty would just be there to watch him host.
Well, can I ask this question? Is Password in the top 10?
Yes.
Or it is in the top 10?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so
that's 10A and 10B.
Okay, 10B.
10A and 10A.
And this show started in 1961 with Alan Ludden as the host, and he hosted it through 67. They revived it again in the 70s, and they brought it back in the late part of the 70s, going into the 80s. He was diagnosed with stomach cancer. Tom Kennedy took over for him, and just temporarily till he got back. Of course, Alan never came back to the show. And then, of course, went on to be Password Plus with Bert Convey.
Yeah.
They invented that game, Super Password. They've done so many versions of that game. But this was the early 60s, and it was just the epitome of class.
Well, there is
every audience member was dressed to the nines. Every contestant was dressed to the nines.
Half of them were smoking.
Yeah.
They all had cocktails. They'd just drinking straight bourbon. While they're doing Password.
Yeah, it was like a dinner party.
How did more people not swear?
Little
on
history
this show
there that maybe the average person didn't know about that show. All right.
So as we move on, number 9 is a show that would always be chocked full of celebrities, and number 9 is the Hollywood Squares with the host Peter Marshall.
Well, and again, other hosts came along and did relatively good jobs with this show, carrying it along. But the timeline that he had this show,
66 to about 81.
That's pretty good pretty good time on it. This show was extremely popular, and so popular that it could be almost be put pre-prime time hours at
It
night.
could be, yeah.
Now-
His most common center square back then was who?
Paul Lynde.
Paul Lynde. That's what I thought. Yeah.
George Gobel was another big name on that show with all the one-liners. Dr. Joyce Brothers was
Yeah.
on there a lot. The interesting thing about Peter Marshall is he became the host. He lobbied for it so Dan Rowan wouldn't get it. If you remember Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In.
Yep.
Okay.
Now, the
There was a
story
feud
goes-
there?
Yes. The story is Peter Marshall used to write jokes for Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. And then there was a falling out for some reason between him and Dan Rowan, and they became, I don't know if it was bitter enemies, but they really didn't like each other. And they were going to give Dan Rowan the host job of Hollywood Squares, and Peter Marshall lobbied and got the job basically so Dan Rowan wouldn't get it.
Okay.
Of course, Dan Rowan was a stand-up comedian before he became on Laugh-In. And there's another story about Dan Rowan. Back in the early part of the 60s, there was a mob boss named Sam Giancana who actually put I think Frank Sinatra had to talk him out of putting a hit on Dan Rowan because they were apparently both seeing Phyllis McGuire of the McGuire sisters.
You only get information like that on Scenic City Sports.
Well, and if you believe any of the conspiracy theories from back in that day, there's a school of thought that Giancana and the mob was partly to do with the assassination of JFK.
Oh, yeah.
Giancana even supposedly confided that in a biographer later in his life that was writing his biography.
Yeah. And Giancana, also
he's
known as
bad
Momo,
dude.
he was basically the head of the Chicago outfit, the one that Capone used to run. And so anyway, the backstory on that. But
A good, strong top 10. I like the fact that you had this in there. This is a game show that I think a lot of people in today's time would easily forget because they don't see it on a regular basis. But when I say pre-prime time hours, and you're talking about 8 o'clock being prime time, I think this came on at 7:30. So
it came on during the day too. And like I said, it's basically tic-tac-toe, but the celebrities.
And speaking of primetime hours, one of quite possibly the most popular primetime game shows ever. Yeah. And when we say primetime, we mean primetime. 8 p.m., 9 p.m.
Yeah.
Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
Yeah. He didn't have to do the...
Had several hosts, but none better than Regis Philbin.
Well, he set the stage that made this show what it became. I don't watch it in today's world, but it was very, very captivating and interesting when it first popped. Again, didn't have to do the JV tour and be on at 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning.
No.
He came on right at 9 and 10 o'clock at night when everybody wanted to see that. And Rusty, I think that's what led tremendously to its popularity.
Well,
it wasn't hidden in a daytime hour show that just people sitting at home got to watch.
Everybody knew Regis.
Well, that was what I was going to say. This is another example of the host carrying the show to start with before everybody knew what the show was about. Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, let's be honest, when this show came out, Regis was as popular as anybody in the world.
Yes.
Everybody every kid that stayed home from school woke up and watched Regis and Kathy Lee before you watched Price is Right. I mean, everybody knew Regis.
And he was Joey Bishop's sidekick on the Joey Bishop show back in the 60s.
Regis made appearances with WWE. I mean, he did all kinds of stuff. Everybody knew who Regis was. But then you watch this show, and you realize I can answer those questions.
And it was the perfect setup, the lighting, the seat, there by yourself. We got the audience involved because sometimes you may have to ask the audience. It was the first really interactive game show. And it was that game show was a rocket ship for
it's not
three or four
but
seasons.
The thing with that is it's not Jeopardy.
No.
Who Wants to Be a Millionaire is a trivia show that you can watch, and most anybody can watch that show, and especially those early questions. And they're multiple choice. Most everybody can answer that.
Yeah.
Not everybody can watch Jeopardy.
No,
Jeopardy's a
no.
great show.
No.
I love it.
No.
But not everybody can watch Jeopardy.
I
This was one
I
that you
actually
could.
happen to be one of those people because the unless it's a sports category, I can't answer any of the stuff that
That
they're
show
doing.
actually became an attraction at MGM Studios in Disney.
Yeah.
They actually had your own Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and they would give away like a Disney cruise and stuff like that. I went to a taping of it one time.
Well, lest we not forget, one of the greatest television moments of all time was the very first time on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire that someone won $1 million. And the guy used his phone a friend to call his father and said, Dad, I don't need your help. I just want you to know that I'm about to win $1 million.
It was How Far the Sun from the Earth.
Yeah. And
Well, and there again, besides toasters and parting gifts, this is a game that's being played for $1 million, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And this sort of spawned the big money prime time game shows. You started seeing them on a bunch of different
Yes.
networks. Greed comes to mind.
Yeah.
With Chuck Woolery.
well, the one with Howie Mandel.
Howie Mandel.
Yeah, Deal or No
Who Wants to Make a
Deal.
Deal.
And his
Yeah,
show,
Deal or
his
No
show
Deal.
is, and I don't think you've got Howie that one either.
I didn't.
No.
But there's a show that grabs a lot of people's
Oh, yeah.
interest.
Yeah.
It really was
Yeah,
a
it
good
does.
show.
It definitely was one receiving votes. The Weakest Link was one
Dwayne
receiving
Wade
votes.
has a good game show right now.
Yeah, The Cube.
The Cube.
Yeah.
That show's great.
But that one is that's the foundation for every
Prime
Yeah,
time.
I agree with that.
Big
every
money
big
primetime
money
show.
I agree
primetime
with that.
show
Different
ever.
era that came
Plus
out.
the perfect host, the perfect set.
Perfect host, perfect
Well,
set.
no,
lighting
and here again, nobody's hosted that show that's held a candle to him.
Jimmy Kimmel did a decent job, but Regis is still Regis. Number 7, Match Game with Gene Rayburn, the original. Now, it has been brought back recently. Alec Baldwin right now is doing a current incarnation of Match Game that is very funny. There's a lot of, current primetime comedians and stuff.
Yeah.
But Match Game, as Scott said earlier about some of the other shows, this was a cocktail party that they just happened to play a game show in the middle of.
This was an all-out
Just party. Yeah,
This was an all-out party. This game show, he actually was the host starting in 1962, and it ran for 7 years. He was actually a panelist on the first couple of shows. Then Gene Rayburn became the host, and it ran for 7 years. It was in black and white. It was kind of the same setup, but later in the 70s, Mark Goodman and them decided, hey, let's update this. Let's make it a little more fun. And then they brought in the celebrities.
Mm-hmm.
Brett Summers and Charles Nelson Riley and
Sammy Davis Jr.
Richard Dawson, Gary
Dawson.
Bergdorf, Elaine Joyce, Fannie
And
Flagg.
Scott Richard Dawson came out
Cotter,
of this show into
yes.
another one.
Gabe Kaplan,
I saw Robert Ehrlich on the show. This is still on TV. You can find these on today.
Game Show
and
Network,
for about
yeah.
4 or 5 seasons of Match Game, just the inside jokes, the innuendos that they would throw in there every once in a while. You could never get away with doing that show the way they did it back then, because people would be offended at some of the stuff they said. But man, it was so much fun just to watch the celebrities interact with each other. And like you said, this is the show that made Richard Dawson a star. And then he went on and,
That's
and
right.
got his own show.
That's right, and we'll probably be mentioning that here
I
shortly,
think you might.
possibly. But this was just really in this era. This was just a show that a lot of people like sitting down and watching.
Yep.
They
still like
they
watching.
didn't give away $100,000. Most of the time, somebody walked away with they were jumping up and down over $5,000. But it wasn't about the purse. The show itself was about the characters that interlocked with the host.
The formula here is you take 6 celebrities, preferably ones that are friends outside of all of this, which most of them back then, the ones they put together were.
Yeah.
You throw alcohol in the mix because every one of them had a drink behind their little screen, and you just turn them loose.
It's like those celebrity roasts.
It's exactly what it was. And it just turned into, like Scott said, it was literally like a cocktail party that you sat there and you were getting to be a part of. And the longer the show went, the funnier the jokes got. And it was just, you know,
and let me
This was
say-
the password cocktail party 3
Yeah.
hours later.
3 hours
and
later.
let me say this: as the contestants rolled out of there, they actually sometimes became the butt of the joke, or they were the odd man on the set.
Yep.
Yeah.
They were the odd man on
yeah,
the set.
Some of them had no idea how to
They
react.
were
to
just
what was
part of
being
the,
said.
the contestants were just part of the decoration. The show itself was all the people over there.
Oh, yeah.
Was all the celebs.
I agree.
And Tattletales used to come on right after that, which was even more innuendo
Yep.
and celebrity stuff. But this show was revived again in the late 70s. He did it some in the 80s with the Hollywood Squares Match Game Hour. You know, he did it for quite a while.
Well, number 6, the Newlywed Game with Bob Eubanks. Now, you can say what you want to, but some of the best one-liners in television history came off of this show.
The best one-liner in TV
and
history.
most of them were unprompted.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's
Just
right.
asking a question. And, you know, Bob also gave us the term making whoopee.
Yep.
That nobody, you know,
And let me
Great
say-
show.
Which spawned the greatest answer of all time,
Oh,
which
yes.
somebody believe is an urban legend, and I won't go into detail,
No.
but I can assure you it's true.
it is
I've
true.
seen the
I've
video.
seen it.
Yeah, I've
Yes.
seen some of those clips too. And if we polled folks back in this era, and I know other game shows have come along since then, this one wins. This was number one in the 60s to the early 70s, Scott.
That show has been on TV in some incantation of it for 5 or 6 decades.
I mean, and
They-
the heck
they
with
brought
the
it
fact
back,
that you
and they
got a
brought it
dryer
back
and a
and brought
washer.
it back.
It's the fact that the some of the questions could be answered the way they were
but
answered.
in the 1970s and 1960s, if you went on the Newlywed Game as newlyweds and you walked out of there with a whole new kitchen,
Oh, God.
you know, refrigerator, stove, you know, there wouldn't have been a microwave back then, but if you walked out with a refrigerator, stove, and a dishwasher, I mean, you know, you're walking out of there for, you know, not to mention the fact that they were those 70s appliances that most of them are still working to this day.
Maybe
you know,
even on set somewhere.
They are.
Yeah,
They
you know,
are. I can
maybe
vouch
on
for some at
set.
the house.
in harvest gold, avocado green, or I don't even know, turd brown, I guess. I don't know.
Westinghouse. Baby.
Yeah, I mean, you know, those
Westinghouse.
appliances, they lasted forever.
Well,
And,
what would the parting gifts to the other three that didn't win?
Oh, it was
A
always
loaf of
like
bread and
rice-a-roni
bologna?
and
good
turtle
stuff.
wax.
Yeah, rice-a-roni, turtle wax, occasionally like a food processor or a can opener.
Cuisinart. It was a Cuisinart.
You know, I mean,
And this show, the premise was so simple. How well do you know the
how
person
well do you
just
know your
married?
person?
And who invented the show?
And again, this host
Oh, Bob Eubanks is
dominated this show, and it would be interesting to see this show
close to
come
being on
back.
Mount Rushmore.
But boy, I don't know who they would get, Scott, that would be able to, with not saying a whole lot, say a
I
lot.
don't know. We'd have to think. Who invented the Newlywed Game? I think we mentioned this before. You mentioned him earlier tonight.
Merv Griffin,
Chuck Barris.
Chuck Barris. Okay,
Oh, I didn't know that.
Chuck Barris.
See, there he
invented
was.
the Newlywed Game.
there he was.
telling
He
you.
gave his best shows away.
Well, I mean, you know, he was too busy being a CIA operative by day, if you
Yeah.
believe the legend. Well, as we move on, it's going to pop up here in just a second. I got a great shot of him in one of the best poses you could possibly have him in. He's got Tootsie Roll Pops in his hand.
There's the man.
But there is the man, Richard Dawson, at number
Killian
5,
himself.
Family Feud. Let me go ahead and tell you, that man has had his lips on more women in the history of that television show than the law ought to allow. How many kisses did Richard Dawson give in all the time that he did Family Feud?
Oh,
Good Lord, I think he kissed every woman that ever was a contestant and probably a few dudes along the way.
this is my wife for 35 years. Good. I'm still going to stick my tongue down her
I'm still going
throat.
to give her a kiss right now.
Well, and this is the one that I can be slightly argumentative about in this respect.
That's
yes,
4 times for playing
yeah.
a drinking game at home.
Yes, he did. He did initiate this show, and he carried it for what?
9 years.
9 years.
75 to 86.
I would argue with you right now, Scott, that Steve Harvey's taken that show to a whole different level than that show was back then. Even though that was out of the gates, it was an interesting show. People loved it. It's still running to today, but I honestly think that Steve Harvey has has, and I'm not going to fault you for putting him as the host of this show because he originated it, but I think Steve Harvey's took the show to another level that Richard Dawson didn't.
Now, I'll say the show itself has gotten a lot, for lack of a better term, raunchier.
Well, yeah.
With some of the questions that they're being asked. This one really wasn't anything like
Everything
that.
with them was tongue-in-cheek. The one thing with the Steve Harvey show is
That's
Steve
true.
does have the benefit
That's true.
of being in 2020 when you can get away with a whole lot more
Oh, yeah.
on television than
That's
you could
that's
back
all
then.
that's true.
And he does a
But-
good job with it. Don't get
But
me wrong.
don't
he does a
kid
good job.
yourself. If you think that show wasn't raunchy back in the day, for what it was and when it was, there was some stuff on that show back in the day that
Oh,
could
yeah.
be considered just as raunchy as anything that comes out today, just because you didn't see that stuff on television. And there were a lot of stuff that was, and the Newlywed Game was the same way. There were a lot of questions on those shows that were very tongue-in-cheek, that they thought they could slide in there, and then every now and again
Yep.
they'd get a response like they did, and it just, you know.
I'll tell you, he was a British American actor. He was on Hogan's Heroes. He played Newkirk, and then he got the match game gig. And every contestant, when they played the bonus game at the end with everybody picked Richard Dawson. Everybody picked Richard
That's
Dawson.
true.
He's
'Cause
just a cool dude.
Well, he was a
cool
likable guy. Yeah,
I mean,
he was
look at
very
him in that picture.
very
He's got
likable.
He's got the flower up on the lapel. He's got the little chain in the vest pocket.
and you remember the celebrity?
I mean-
you remember the celebrity episodes of these?
yes.
Dukes of Hazzard versus the
Oh,
Waltons,
yes.
Batman versus Gilligan's
NFL
Island.
versus the NBA, or
Yeah.
AFC versus the NFC.
And they put him on prime time ABC,
Yes.
and people he wore the tux.
No,
and-
they're back doing that now. They've brought the celebrity episodes back. Steve Harvey has brought that back, and a few weeks ago I watched one that Chrissy had taped, and it was the NFL Hall of Famers versus current NFL players.
And Steve Harvey's probably got a decade under his belt with that
He's
show.
getting pretty close
he's got like
to it.
11 or 12
Yeah,
years.
I mean, he's
got,
getting pretty
he's got
close to
just
it
about
now,
as much
absolutely.
as Richard Dawson has, but I guess it depends how old you are. I grew up with that version of the show.
Yeah.
I do watch the other show. Maybe somebody that's 30 years old right now would tell me, Steve Harvey's the best host because they never heard of
That's true.
Richard Dawson.
That's true.
To me, it's always going to be Richard Dawson.
Well,
That's true.
here is one of the quintessential game show hosts of all time, and that is none other than Monty Hall and Let's Make a Deal. Everybody has sat at home at some time or another and screamed at their television screen, "Door number 1! Take the curtain! The box!" I mean, everybody thinks that they can go on Let's Make a Deal and make the right decision.
yeah. Again,
And he got that on first take too, so
Yeah.
that makes me believe.
again, such a great premise. I'm
Yep.
going to give you $300.
Yep.
And you can keep it. Or I can show you that box right there, and there may be something better underneath it, or it may not be.
A very entertaining show.
And that's all it was, basically. It was just, do you want to trade up for something better, or
Or
whatever.
risk what you're getting. A show that's still on the air.
Wayne Brady, current
and Wayne
host.
Brady does a good job with it as well.
And Monty Hall actually came out and did a cameo on like the first show that Wayne Brady hosted back in like 2003. He hosted every single episode from 1963 to 1986.
Golly.
23 consecutive years, and then he came back a couple other times as they kept reviving the show. And I remember watching at my grandmother's house. The big deal of the day, when it would get to $10,000, woo!
Oh, yeah.
And the pilot episode, actually I just ran across it the other day. Nobody dressed up and wore the costumes. That didn't happen until a little bit later, when I guess people decided,
Well, you were trying to get his attention. You
Yeah.
wanted him to pick you, so you and that's the funny thing. You mentioned $10,000.
so that part of the show was created by the
fans.
By the fans
By the
itself.
fans.
You mentioned the $10,000 threshold. And the thing about that is if you think about that $10,000 threshold, in 1960s, all the way up until the late 1970s, you could buy a brand new car for about $5,500 to $7,800 would buy you nice automobiles.
top of the line.
Top of the line Lincolns, Fords. You could buy nice cars for under $10,000.
Mm-hmm.
And when you would see those deals and somebody would win a car, and it's funny when you go back and you watch those episodes now, and it's like, you win a Ford Escort, and they're like, yeah, but you still want a car.
Chevette, baby.
A Chevy Chevette. I mean, how many times did you
Now,
see
that really
somebody...
could get behind the box.
But you think about some of the stuff that you saw people win that you got excited about. How many times did you see somebody win a pop-up camper?
Mm-hmm.
You know, kayaks,
Go
canoes,
back
boats.
on YouTube and watch the original episodes of The Price is Right from the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
They literally gave away houses.
Yeah.
They literally gave away an ice cream truck. And sometimes people on that show would win like $20,000 worth of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just so different than what it turned out to be. Bill Cullen was the host back then. But it's fascinating.
The best part
watch.
is when you watch them when you watch people in those eras guess how much something cost.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a 6-pack of Budweiser, 1963. How much was a 6-pack of Budweiser? You know, and today, $8.99, $7.99, something like that. Back then, you know, it was like $1.50.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that was a lot. I mean, you know, for them, they'd sit there and they'd agonize about it.
I was just watching.
I don't know, Bob.
Roku channel has it's a Bob Barker channel. It's all Price is Right with Bob Barker, and they had, I think it was like the high-low game where you had to pick whatever prices. Nothing was over $1.49, and I'm like, everything now would be way over $1.49. But
How many people can sing the mountain climber song? I mean, come on, these are we do this because we love this stuff, and we know everybody out there loves all this stuff as much as we
boxes,
do.
And
curtains, boxes, and doors, man.
Doors.
That was
Yeah.
Now this is the next one coming up is the one that I have a legitimate bone to pick about it all.
Well,
And that is Wheel of Fortune with Pat Sajak.
Well,
And I will tell you why.
Let the author defend himself.
I will tell you. Well, I'll tell you my bone,
I'll let him
and then
listen
you
to
can
it.
defend. And that is, this show is still on
It is.
exactly as it is shown.
It is.
The exact same two hosts since 1981. So now, I'll give you, as we go 2 and 1, I'm not going to go too far into all this. I will give you that he does not have the charisma of some of the other hosts, but just longevity alone. If he goes another 5 to 8 years, how do you
He's
not?
in Barker territory.
He's in Barker territory. I mean, and that's the thing too. You look at Pat Sajak, and he still looks like. I mean, he don't look like he's much older than 50 years old.
He certainly hasn't aged on TV
and he's
much.
74.
I was
Is
going to
that
say,
right?
I knew he was in his
He-
75.
he's done
What
a real
movie
good.
was he in? In 1980, he had a cameo.
Oh,
2 cameos.
Was he in Cannonball Run?
No. But you're kind of in the ballpark.
Same family?
No. Well, comedy. It was a comedy.
Oh, okay. I don't know.
He played an anchor man from Buffalo, New York, which is what he was. Airplane.
Oh.
If you go back and watch the original Airplane, he's in there twice. One time he's got the phone
Well, no
cord
wonder
wrapped
he's
around
still
his-
having to work. He's
wrapped
trying
around
to
his
he's
neck
trying to
and
undo
stuff.
that cameo.
Well, here's a good example.
And of course, he wasn't the original host. Chuck Woolery was the original host back when it was Shopper's Paradise, back in the pilot episode. Then they've had 2 or 3 different hosts, and Pat Sajak eventually replaced, I think, the great Rolf Benershka for San Diego Charger fans.
That would
out
be
there.
another interesting side of these guys that are so well known with these shows. Were they first picks? Were they second picks? Were they third, fourth, or fifth picks?
He was, like I said, technically he was like the 5th host of the show. And the only reason I've dropped him to 3 and not 2 is because you can't do that show without his co-host.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. And we should have, I should have put him and Vanna both up here because where Pat goes, Vanna goes.
Yeah.
The thing about Wheel of Fortune is it is an every man's show.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody can watch Wheel of Fortune, and everybody can get those puzzles. They're not overly difficult. Now, when they made that format change a few years back, when they did like the big game at the end, and they automatically gave them the RSTLNE,
Yeah.
and then they still got to pick a couple other letters. It's kind of like, oh man, I don't like that. But it turned
Everybody
out,
was picking those letters.
and I
so
like a lot of these combo puzzles they do now. I think are awesome.
You either get that when you see those letters, or you're
you
just
don't.
stumped for a minute.
And
you,
the thing about it is you know your game show is successful and popular when it crosses over into other big time television shows.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of the Big Bang Theory episode where Mrs. Wallowitz is upstairs taking a bath, and Howard, Raj, Leonard, and Sheldon are sitting downstairs on the couch. And Howard explains to Sheldon that his mom is a wheel savant. And he names off how many spaces it is, what letters are before anybody's ever said anything, and she just yells it out, and Sheldon just keeps going, "It's amazing. How'd she do that?"
My favorite one was a Family Guy episode where Peter was doing the bonus round, and he's like, "Okay, give me 5 consonants and 1 vowel." And he's like, "All right, a Q, a Z, a P, a second Q, a third Q, and the Batman symbol." And he's like, "Okay, no letters. This is gonna be. Is it Alex Carrison Webster?" Holy crap! I got it.
I mean, Wheel of Fortune is a great show. Everybody knows that dadgum theme song. If you had a Nintendo back in the day, 80% of America probably had the Wheel of Fortune Nintendo game.
It's a slot machine.
It's a slot machine. I played it in New Orleans back this past summer. I mean, it's Wheel is one of those great ones, but I mean, obviously, if you know that we put Wheel at number 3, if you are even remotely versed in television shows, most of you should know what number 2 and number 1 are. And I'm gonna go ahead and click number 2. It'll pop up here in just a second for my guys here in studio.
I asked the wife. I was like, "I'm gonna give you 3 game shows. You tell me."
Oh, you phoned a friend.
1 through 3, and she had the exact order. And the reason I went with this at 2 is because we know good and well if Alex Trebek hadn't gotten sick, he'd still be doing Jeopardy.
Oh, absolutely.
Sure.
And would have done it another 10 or 12 years.
And of course, he wasn't the first host of Jeopardy. You go back to the 60s and the original version with Art.
Linkletter.
No, not Linkletter. God, I just drew a blank on his name. Anyway, he did the original Jeopardy. They revived the show in 1984, and Alex Trebek has hosted everything
from 84.
Every game show in the world. He even hosted Wheel of Fortune for a week. He did game shows that some people have probably never ever heard of.
So it took him a while to
find his niche.
High rollers. There was an original game called Double Dare that he was a part of. I mean, just game show after game show after game show after game show. And then Jeopardy came along. He got the gig, and he was still doing classic concentration in the later part of the 80s too, but he really found his niche with Jeopardy.
And of all the game show hosts, correct me if you feel I'm differently wrong here, but of all the game show hosts, he actually had to do some homework himself.
Oh, absolutely.
Than letting the game just play out, because some of those words were. You have to look them up and say, how do you pronounce that and what's that mean?
37 years of doing that show while he was going through cancer treatments and everything else.
Well, and here's the thing about Jeopardy that a lot of people don't know. Jeopardy is one of the only big-time television game shows like that spawned spin-offs. Jeopardy had regular Jeopardy. Mm-hmm. VH1 at one time had Rock and Roll Jeopardy.
Yeah.
That was all music questions. And one of our favorite sportscasters, Dan Patrick, hosted Sports Jeopardy. Mm-hmm. And Alex Trebek, when Dan got the gig as Sports Jeopardy, Alex came on the Dan Patrick show and talked to him about it and everything, and he gave him a present. The present was a crayon, because the crayon was what Alex would use to mark off the questions as they were asked. Because if something happened and they had to go back and somebody, a question was wrong or whatever, he could easily wipe the crayon off of his wax sheet or his plastic sheet and go back to that very same question. And he gave Dan a red crayon when Dan became the host of Sports Jeopardy.
Yeah, that's some more. Yeah. In elected, you just don't get everywhere.
Well, and Jeopardy is one of those, not everybody likes it. I think there are a lot of people that watch Jeopardy just because of Alex.
Well, I'll have to say this. Of all the shows you just threw up there, it's amongst one of my least favorites. It may be the least favorite, but again, I agree with Rusty. You became where you were enamored of what a good job that he had done.
And you would learn things watching that show.
Yeah.
You could.
I mean, there were
You
you know,
could. If
potent
you-
potables for $500, Alex.
Yeah.
If you could retain it.
And then, of course, all the Saturday Night Live
Oh, my
parodies
God,
of it.
dude.
But I did notice most of the time, guys, when somebody went on there and they threw them a curveball about a sports section, they were really poor at it.
They were.
They didn't know anything.
Every now and again, you'd get somebody that was a sports fan,
What's the
but
biggest?
for the most
What's
part,
the biggest sports show that comes on in February
You've
for
got 4
1,000?
PhDs and then also throw football.
I don't know. What could it be? What comes around every 4 years?
And I can tell you from
explain
experience.
the forward pass rule.
I can tell you from experience, the questions on the Jeopardy test were tougher than the questions that
are.
are on the show sometimes.
They are.
'Cause
I've
I've-
tried
I've-
it 2 or 3 times.
That's eliminating a lot of folks. Then.
Yep.
I've tried it, and
It's tough.
I came close to getting
Scott and I can sit down
Yeah.
together and watch an episode of Jeopardy, and we'll damn near answer every question on it. I mean, because we like goofy trivia stuff like
Yeah.
that. Not everybody can do that.
All
And
right.
I mean, let's be honest.
That leads us.
I don't think that there's going to be any surprise if Jeopardy's our number 2. I don't think anybody's going to be surprised when
It's
number 1
remote
flashes
control
up
with
there
no, it's not. It's
and is the man himself
still alive and kicking at 98 years old.
out here
98.
reminding you to get your to
Pets
help control the
spayed
pet
and-
population. Get your pets spayed or neutered,
That's right. That's
and that
right.
is Bob Barker, and The Price is Right.
And for many, many years, Scott, he dyed his hair black. He didn't think
Grecian
that
Formula
would
4.
look right going gray, but somebody convinced him that hey, it's you. It's not the hair dye. But the show itself, we saw it evolve from giving away hundreds of dollars worth of stuff to going on at late night and giving away thousands and thousands of dollars of stuff.
They've given away $1 million.
Well, especially when you used to watch some of those people and they would bid for a showcase, and they bid $18,000 and they were over. Then it got to the point where somebody's bidding $78,000 and they're $78,000 under.
Yeah.
So that's where that show went. But again, the popularity and the fact that you could get people to advertise on that show probably was as easy a show out there to get
And I mean, the thing
advertisement.
about The Price is Right is I would like to know an exact number of how many actual games there were.
Oh, I'm sure it's probably on Wikipedia or something like that.
It's got to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 or 50.
Probably.
Well, they've
Because
added.
there were a few that would just pop up once in a while. And there were a lot that were they were standards. The mountain climber, Plinko, the putting game that he did.
I saw one tonight when I was.
I think the putting game went away after he went
It
away.
did.
Well, now they've revived it. It's now hole in one or two.
Okay.
You can get a second chance at making the putt. There was one called the phone home game. Came out in the 80s after E.T. and you could call somebody. You hooked up with somebody that was watching the show from the house, and you played the game together, and you split whatever you won. But some of that stuff, Golden Road. When Golden Road came out, the price was going to be well over $15,000, even way back then. I remember watching one of the early episodes. Of course, he started that as host on CBS in 1972, all the way to 2007.
35 years.
Yeah. So, I mean...
Well, you see the memes on, like, Facebook. It's the 80s kid sick at home starter kit, and it's like chicken noodle soup, red Jell-O, and The Price is Right.
Well,
and The Young and the Restless.
Well, this one, they had two women that were in the Showcase Showdown. The first one missed it by $9.
Wow.
The second lady missed it by $8.
And won both.
And ended up winning both.
Yeah, because it was, if you were within $100, you won
Yeah,
both
that's
showcases.
right.
And then now they've upped that to like $250 or something.
And where everything else you could make an argument. That's number 5. You could make an argument, number 6, that the other ones could be swapped around here or there. That to me is undebatable. That is the best host. and what went on to be the most recognizable show. You know, and there's other shows out there, Scott, that were just as entertaining from a standpoint, but that one's the most iconic.
But
of
he
all
had,
of them.
I mean, you know, you think about it. He had Barker's Beauties. You know, he had
Johnny Olsen.
And then he had Johnny Olsen to start with. Later he had Rod Roddy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he always had great hype men. They always had the best prizes. I mean, if you watched Let's Make a Deal might give away a Ford Escort, or they might give away a Taurus. Price is Right gave away a Mustang.
Yeah.
Or they gave away a Ford F-150 or a Camaro.
Well, you know why?
Or,
it's advertisement.
because the advertisement.
The
They
advertising
had the
dollars.
money.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how many times did you watch Price is Right? And these were the ones I was always envious of. You would have the one guy that got in the Showcase Showdown, and their showcase was like the travel showcase.
Oh, yeah.
It was the one that was like 5 trips, and it was all over the dadgum world, and it was like 45 or 50 grand worth of travel.
And a lot of folks might think that about Oprah Winfrey doing that on her own dollars. I don't think so. She had some major advertisers
She had people that were willing to throw
giving
stuff out
dollars,
there.
and she could throw a lot of things out there.
And I mean, Bob Barker was so iconic that later in life he begins to make movie appearance. I mean, Lord, everybody remembers him kicking Happy Gilmore's butt and Happy Gilmore. I mean, you know,
And he was on Truth or Consequences on NBC
Yes.
for years before he got the gig to do Price is Right on CBS.
he still used the same style microphone in the early 2000s that he was using in the early 70s. That long, slender little ball at the top.
Well,
mic.
and you know that there was production meetings that talked about differences, and I think somebody would stand up, and it might have been Bob Barker's himself. He said, "Let's not do away with everything that
If it
works."
ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, somebody stood strong on some of those
You know,
things.
when
You got to
people
figure he's been 11 o'clock on CBS
Oh.
for almost 40 years.
And
You,
I mean,
you knew when you turned on the TV at 11, you were going to see Bob Barker.
you know, and Drew Carey, to his credit, Drew Carey did a good job and has done a good job
He
with
has.
his incarnation of The Price is Right.
He's grown on me.
It's entertaining, but you know, I felt bad for him.
It's hard to follow a legend.
That's what I was going to
It's
say.
really
I felt,
hard to
I
do
felt
that.
bad for him. You know, it's like we talk about all the time. At some point, somebody's going to have to follow Nick Saban in Alabama.
And that's going to be a struggle.
It's going to be you know, when you have that, it's no different than at some point somebody was going to have to follow Peyton Manning in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
There's always, when you replace a legend, that's always a tough thing. And Drew Carey's done a great job, but Drew Carey's not Bob Barker. And in 40 years from now, are we still going to be seeing Drew Carey on The Price is Right? Or are we by that point going to have somebody new that has come along? Or will game shows still be around at that time? You know, I'm going to switch us off, you know, back to the three of us. But, you know, nowadays, if you look at what constitutes game shows on TV now, it's more stuff like To Tell the Truth is a big one right now. You know, Anthony Anderson hosts that one, that's a hilarious show, which is a play off of an old show
That's right.
back in the day.
That was one that I had thought about putting up there, To Tell the Truth. What's My Line is one that I thought
Line
about
is it
putting up there.
anyways? Yeah.
Tic-Tac-Doe
Yeah.
with Wink Martindale. I hated
Golly,
not to
forgot
get
about
And Wink Martindale
in there.
Wink Martindale was a guy that was just, I mean, when you think of game show host, I mean, his name pops up on probably a lot of those shows that somebody else got it, that his name may have been in the mix.
And I'll tell you, one of the ones that broke my heart not to put it on there was Card Sharks.
It's a
Because
good one.
I loved Card Sharks, still do when it comes on. But Jim Perry hosted it as long as Bob Eubanks did, and I'm like, I really
Well,
couldn't tell which one was better than the other.
One of my favorites as a kid was Press Your Luck.
Yeah,
Pressure Love.
I mean, whenever they got hit, and then the whammy would come out and do,
and I
the
thought
little
about that
cartoon.
one.
I
It
mean,
just wasn't around long enough.
no, it wasn't.
And Peter
Pressure Luck
Tomarkin
was a short
was
show.
a great host, but bless
But a
his heart,
great game
got
show,
killed
man.
in that plane accident. But man, that was such a perfect show when it
Yeah.
came out. Had everything. Trying to think, I even
Well,
thought about You Bet Your Life with Groucho Marx was considered.
Yeah.
I mean, there has been several, but when you had to throw a game show with a game show host together,
and I really thought that was only fair to associate those hosts, and we talk about every one of those hosts. You can almost say was the reason behind the popularity of the show itself, and at least set the stage. But I think when we brought up Regis Philbin, nobody has been able to sit in that seat and play that role and make that game show so daggum interesting. Mm-hmm. It's more than just that, an opportunity to win $1 million.
It's an art. Hosting a game show is an art.
It is. I actually like, and we brought it up. I actually like Deal or No Deal with Howie Mandel. Mm-hmm. I really think that game has a lot of
Deal or No Deal is a fun show to watch.
It is. Yeah. It really is. I know it's a lot of luck involved, but it's when to stop and when to continue in that respect.
Odds.
But
it's like we brought up the new one. We brought up everything now is getting more physical and talent based. I mean, there's a lot of. Do you consider the X Factor a game show? Do you consider American Idol a game show? Because let's be honest, it's a game show. I mean, it is a game show.
But you're saying you got to bring this great skill to
have to bring
the table.
Dancing with the Stars is a game show. Survivor is a game show. Mm-hmm. These are game shows. These are people doing things to win prizes. I mean, you think about a show like Survivor, that's one which I'm actually a little bit surprised that it didn't make the list, because Probst has hosted it all these years, and I think they're pushing 20 years at this point, mm-hmm. give or take. But you take a show like that, people go out there and compete in the friggin' jungle, to win $500,000. Everything now is way more risk reward type of shows.
American Ninja Warrior, perfect example. Well, that new one on TBS, the Four Elements.
No, the one with Cody Rhodes and all of them. The
Go Big
the Go Big show. That one. The one with Dwayne Wade, The Cube. I mean, those shows are all physical, and the amount of money that can be won on those shows. Mm-hmm. The Cube is one. I think the most I've seen one on there so far is $50,000 is the highest I've seen somebody get. Because those games that they have those people do, you look at them, and we think from the outside looking in, we're like, that's simple, I could do that. And then you hear that stinking cube go, the odds of doing this are one in this.
Here's one we haven't really named, and it had a lot of fun in watching it. I can't think of the host name. I know you will. The dating game.
Oh yeah, Jim Lang.
Lane. I mean, and
I thought about him for Name That Tune, because he was a host of Name
That Tune, such a good show.
Yeah, and that was another one. And the only reason I didn't put that one in there is because Jim Lang was a solid game show host. I just don't think he was better than the 10 that we had.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that in that respect. In modern day, all these shows where you're trying to match up and get a mate at the end of the show after 10, 12 weeks. That's the dating game in 30 minutes.
90 day fiance.
That was the dating game in 30 minutes and 2 questions.
And now you have, on the musical side now, you have those, I don't even know what the names of all of them are, but, you have the ones where they play the songs and you have to finish the lyrics out. You have the ones where you try to guess the genres of music. There's some really good celebrity game shows right now. There's a celebrity game show right now that's hosted by Jimmy Fallon, hosts it, and they put together 2-man celebrity teams, and they do musical-based challenges. One of the challenges is they put out like 9 different instruments, and the people with no professional training have to try and play one of these 9 different instruments and convince their teammate of what a particular song is. And it could be anything from a trombone to a kazoo to a snare drum to any number of things. But everything is getting way more advanced. I don't want to say advanced. I guess that's kind of a wrong word to use. But I love this. Scott couldn't have picked
more physical than cerebral.
Exactly.
And I'm good with his top 10.
You could not have picked 10 better. These are true old school game shows.
I'm good with it.
Yeah.
You can see yourself walking on some of these shows and walking out with a margarita machine and being happy because that was your party mix.
I would say of the top of the top 10 that you had there, Scott, the one that goes back the furthest, that's probably not been on the air in most recent, it probably is it Password? Would that go
Probably.
back? The one that's not
Password,
been
yeah.
the most recently.
Out of the 11 we put on there, in its current incantation, because like I said, Price is Right came out in early,
and
the
they're still out there.
mid-50s,
Everything's still out
with
there.
Bob Barker came out in 72. Password came out in 61. Match Game came out in 62, but not the Match Game that we know and love today.
And I
Okay.
mean, look at her.
But if you go on Buzzer, on Roku, or some of these other,
So that
you
would
can
be the
still
oldest
see.
one that we'd go
Yeah.
Yeah,
back
you
to.
can still see these game shows, and that's really why some of these made it on there, because here we are 50, 60, 70 years later, you can still turn on cable TV and watch these.
And if that right there doesn't show you why Betty White was America's sweetheart for her entire life, I don't know what else would.
She was on Match Game.
Yep.
She did. Oh gosh, she did about every game show.
Well, I
There
would think in her prime years that's what she did the most.
Well, I mean, think about
was
it.
game shows. She didn't get into movies until a little bit
Right.
late in life.
Oh,
And
she
think
did
about
Mary
it.
Tyler Moore show in the 70s, and that
You know
kept
that
the
they
popular
got.
rating.
You know that those celebrities got appearance fees for being on those
Of course
shows.
they did, yeah.
And in that era, they weren't millionaires. So if you could make a couple of grand for going on Password, hell yeah, I'll make a couple of grand for being on Password.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That
Go in there for a week and
Yeah,
promote
make
my
10
new
grand.
show and come out of there with 10, 15
and get on to your agent for not. How come I can't get on that
why
show?
can't I be on here all the time?
Yeah.
Go get me a game show. I'm as charismatic as that clown
I mean,
over there.
like I said, how many people were hawking a brand new show that was coming on, and they talk about, hey, tell us about your new series that's coming on. Oh, yeah, blah, 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 blah. And so it was fun. It was fun putting it together. It was a little more stressful than I thought it was going to be.
I think you did a good job.
Did a heck of a job.
You did a good job.
There you go. Tell us what you think in the comments. If you think I'm right, if you think I'm wrong, keep in mind you're talking to a guy that's pushing 50. So
And this was a homework assignment in college game, so he's got a little bit of head start on you, although it did take him a month to find the homework.
But you're talking to somebody who watches the Game Show Network for fun. Scott loves game shows. Always has, always will. I mean, he and I will be riding down the road. Man, I was watching such and such the other night on the Game Show Network, and it was from like 1973, and he'll tell me
and they
about.
don't show those old ones anymore.
Yeah, I know.
Well, and again,
You gotta search for 'em.
staying with
YouTube.
our theme,
YouTube.
we are a sports show, but we do have some other interest, and we did try to make something competitive of that right there in listing in chronological order of top 10, and you can debate that with us.
Yep. Guys, we appreciate it. This has been a. Well, Scott, I ain't on screen. You go ahead and close it.
It's been a fun episode. I've been looking forward to this all week, knowing we were going to do this tonight, and maybe we'll come up with something else that.
I'm proud for you. I think
one
you
of
not.
you two can
Did a hell of a job.
take a shot at coming up with something.
I
that,
think you did good.
Yeah, this is right in my wheelhouse. Game shows and roller coasters, that and barbecue restaurants. I'm good with any of those three, and then after that, I'll probably need some help. But anyway. You've been watching Scenic City Sports Tonight. We'll be coming to you next week. Not sure exactly what day and time yet. Like
We'll let you know
Rusty
ahead of
said, we have lives.
Yeah, so we have to throw her out there when we can.
But we'll be back, and we'll be talking a whole lot more sports, a whole lot more nonsense, and keep watching to see who joins the LIV next week.
The views and opinions expressed on this show are those of its host and owners and in no way represent the views of the people, institutions, or organizations that Scenic City Sports is involved The views and opinions expressed on this show are those of its host and owners and in no way represent the views of the people, institutions, or organizations that Scenic City Sports is involved with in a professional or personal capacity. Thanks for watching and enjoy the show.
Well, the days are short and the nights are long. A room slowly fills with song. All I need is one reminder. Parkway, blue blinders. Well, I begged and cheated and I borrowed for my life upon the road. I'm still looking for some gold at the end of my rainbow. Yes, and someday I will find her on a parkway, blue blinder. On a parkway, blue blinder. Someday I will find her. Yes, and someday I will find her on a parkway, blue blinder. On a parkway, blue blinder. On a parkway. On the parkway, on an autumn day. Yes, and leaves fall like confetti in a New York parade. On the parkway, on an autumn day. Yes, and leaves fall